The crankshaft for a 300 TDI is kind of a robust piece of kit. It's developed off the old 2 1/4, which used to have a 3 main bearing. These are the main bearings, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but the old series didn't have this middle one here. So they sometimes were a little bit funny on cranks. They used to crack cranks and things like that. But the actual dimensions are exactly the same. They didn't change the bearings or the bushings or anything. But this is the one that's going to go back in. It's a used one. The old crank needed a regrind, and we just haven't got time to grind it. And well, the customer really wanted a new crank, and the new cranks that were available to me were made in China, which I don't want. So we're going to use a good used crank. Now I took this down to the machine shop already, and he's measured it all up for me. But just if you want to check, get an outside caliper, and what you do is you check all the bearings. You know, like I'm going to see if I can swing this across a little bit and measure them just using a caliper. You know, and they should feel the same all the way. You know, you'll get if you get one of these things, you'll get used to them, and you'll get a feel for what they feel like. Because even like tenths of a thousandth of an inch you can pick up with these. They're really handy little things to have. You can't sort of measure very accurately between them, but you can get a good idea in comparison. So we're going to check all the surfaces. We're going to check all the surfaces for any nicks and scores and bits and pieces that's kicking about. But most importantly, a lot of people forget this. Inside here, and this does look a bit dirty. I haven't washed this one off yet properly. I've washed it off once, but now I've been checking it and got it all grubby again. But inside here is the face where the thrust washers go on. Now this is sometimes neglected, and sometimes people forget these. And if you've ever had low oil or low oil starvation, that these can get ground. And those washers stop the crank moving backwards and forwards, and especially when you put your foot on the clutch, because, as Sir Isaac Newton said, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So when you put your foot on the clutch, you're actually pushing down the weight on the crank, and you're pushing against this thrust face here. Alright, now we're going to set this crank up. I'm going to show you how to do it, how to set the end float to make sure it's within tolerances. But one little side note I'll just tell you. Many years ago I fixed a tractor when I was in New Zealand, and sometimes it would start and sometimes it wouldn't start, and couldn't sort of work it out why would it would just sort of block up and lock up. What it turned out to be was the thrust washers were so bad that the crank was moving forward and jamming up inside the block. So of course we took it all out and things like this, and fortunately that tractor came with a spare crankshaft, so maybe they knew something that we didn't. We changed the crank, changed the bearings, and everything was fine after that. So yeah, so that's one thing to look for. Another thing, make sure the oil passages are nice and clean. I use one of these old things. I've actually just picked this off the shelf because this is the old one. I can't find a good one. But if you pass it down inside the oil ways from both sides, like that, you can make sure that this crank is nice and clean. You can do them all. Now the oil ways are kind of strange. They come from the main bearings and they're drilled up at an angle. They're drilled up at an angle to the big ends. So this one feeds this one. This one feeds this one. There is no feed on the centre bearing. It's just plain. There's no oil hole. This one feeds this one, and this one feeds this one. And it's really important to get those all nicely cleaned out. You know, just get your little brush. Make sure there's no dirt and debris in there. Also, another thing to check for dirt and debris. You would have thought that by centrifugal force that all the gunk and stuff would come out of these holes here. Well, this isn't the right size brush, but I'll just give you an idea and just give them a good washing out. You know, and these are actually the holes for balancing. They're not oil waste, they're just for when the crank was balanced. Same goes on the other side. You'll find that there's the balances there. And just make sure that they're all nicely drilled out and nicely cleaned out. So I'm going to put this back in the parts washer and clean it, and then we're going to set this block up. We're going to set the block up ready to fit the crank.